Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about, and you mentioned Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson also, the last time he went international, he was to interview Viktor Orban, the strongman in Hungary. And you literally have, obviously, Donald Trump, who can be fairly labeled as Putin's puppet. He's never criticized him. Many people say the reason that the war started was not because of Afghanistan's botched withdrawal or Trump's negotiating the surrender, which started the whole thing in Afghanistan, but the fact that Trump was going to dismantle NATO. And that's obviously Putin's number one goal. So when that wasn't going to happen, well, then he had to launch the war. And let's just say, okay, the war has been catastrophic. Russia had the reputation of having one of the world's great armies. It's been laid to waste by a bunch of people that they thought were going to be rebels and would fall in a few days. They were going to march into Kyiv in 3 days. So my long-winded question is simply, what explains this right's, not just support, but sometimes idolatry of Putin? It's not just Trump. Obviously, he's done cringeworthy things, like say that he took Putin's word over his own intelligence agencies, and if Putin, if a country in NATO didn't pay their bills, that he would say, not only would I not defend you, but have at it, which, by the way, is ironic from the all-time chronic non-bill payer in the history of American business. So let's cherish the irony there. But and there are several Republican senators, I'm not even going to mention the dimwits' names, who are coming out in support of Putin. What is the deal here? There are a lot of theories, but I'd love to hear yours for this Republican, almost idolatry in some cases, of Putin.
I have to say many Eastern European, right, cherish the legacy of Reaganism, right? For many Eastern Europeans, many of us who come from the region, they do cherish this, the image of the strong United States capable to act on, in defense of the liberal values against these dictators. And it's really particularly sad to watch this situation unraveling on the Republican side of the spectrum, precisely for that very legacy of the Cold War and successful victory against dictatorship that is represented by Reagan. But this is actually takes us closer to my recent book, which also covers the rise of populism in the post-communist world. And this is essentially the movements, as I argue, that partly demonstrate the frustration with the status quo, the way it's been shaped in the liberal democracies in this age of globalization. There's just too many losers, unfortunately, primarily found among the working class electorates who found themselves on the losing side of globalization, immigration. They don't feel like they are the ones to whom the establishment caters. And I think Trump sort of inadvertently, somewhat ironically, as you said, because of who he is actually, has become a voice for many of these groups, right? It's not as by an accident that say we have seen stronger support for Trump in Rust Belt regions, in more economically stagnating regions, and that his agenda has emphasized the role of the jobs, return jobs, make more jobs, and also ending transatlantic alliances and these agreements, because ultimately these constituencies view transatlanticism as one of these essentially foundational elements of this new globalized order, which emerged, of which they find themselves being as losers, right? So this is broadly speaking, and to sum it up quickly. Accordingly, this in post-communist Europe also, because marketization, the adoption of market reforms, happens simultaneously with political reforms and democratization. They now confuse, the societies confuse political liberalism and economic liberalism. So they blame the economic misfortunes, partly associated to market reforms, to democracy. And it's therefore much easier for actors like Viktor Orban to justify this illiberal democracy and rejection of many important tenets of political liberalism by blaming economic reforms and economic liberalism. One of the possible solutions is certainly perhaps introducing more social protection to these groups. And I think there are ways to explore this, because unfortunately this situation will probably be reinforced by transformation, introduction of new technologies, and more people essentially finding themselves with declining social status and declining economic status as well. So to me, at least, perhaps it's somewhat of a simplistic explanation, but it does account at least for part of the story. And yes, therefore, these groups, populist right parties that spread across all of Europe, in the United States and beyond, they are quite oriented towards against globalization, against these transatlantic commitments and whatnot. Having said that, there were a number of studies run by scholars in the United States. And the good news for Republican constituencies is, first of all, in general, nobody likes Putin. It's not like somebody wants to be friends with Putin, maybe apart from Donald Trump, although even he's not very open about it, right? Most Republican constituencies do understand that Russia is a challenge. They just don't want to invest too much in countering that challenge. They don't think it's their problem to do that. But there are ways to explain it and to communicate it to them, showing that, first of all, it is the problem it's everybody's problem, right? Because failure to contain Russia empowers China. China still remains high on the Republican agenda. They're also quite sensitive to the information about persecution of, say, evangelical Christians that Russia continuously does on occupied territories of Ukraine, and all these tortures and rapes. So there's a lot of people who are open and sensitive to that information, and they're more likely to support aid to Ukraine. It's perhaps maybe better to frame this war as the war against Putin rather in support of Ukraine, precisely because of how big the challenge is. Lastly, I will say that it's also it's not well understood that most of the money that the United States offers to Ukraine, the money stays in the United States, and it is reinvested in the U.S. defense industry, which then creates more jobs for these very constituencies. So ultimately, it may be beneficial for everybody. Ultimately, it is about the future world in which our kids are going to be living, and let's try to work together to create a better future for them.
Thank you. I'll just say one thing, and I'll give Carrie the last word. She's heard me say many times that whatever you think of Donald Trump, he is the symptom in this country, not the problem. And populism is what caused Donald Trump, and inequality is what's caused populism. And the inequality in this country is the greatest it's been since the Gilded 20s. And back then, if you look, we had a lot of the same anti-immigrant zealotry that we're having now. The difference was back then, we actually passed policies to mitigate the problem in terms of creating an income tax and Social Security and banking regulations and all this stuff. Now we have policies that are exacerbating it. And so it's a very tough situation politically. But I do believe that in the end, I hope people will realize that it's going to cost us a lot more if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, and then we have to defend under Article 5 of NATO, one of the Baltic states or Poland.
Exactly.
So hopefully we will get our act together and get the money, because we haven't lost a single American soldier, and we've humiliated one of the supposed great powers. So I think it's been money well spent. But as I said, right, Carrie, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, well, we got to run, but real quick, Maria, can you just give us the full title of your book so people can look that up if they want?
Oh, thank you very much. It's called When Left Moves Right, the decline of the left parties and the rise of the populist right parties in post-communist Europe.
Yep. So when left moves right, that's the name.
I do draw a lot of parallels between post-communist Europe and Western Europe, and so a lot of the readers will find a lot of parallels between what is happening in the United States as well.
Yep, and it was published by Oxford Press, so you know she's smart. So Maria, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Maria, it's been great having you. We'll definitely have you back. Again, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your fellow Russians over the loss at the tender age of 47 of one of your great patriots.
Thank you.